Hi, Tashiya. Thank you so much for joining me today to have this exciting conversation about your experience documenting various protest sites um, in Colombo and in Greater Colombo during this very rather difficult time of political and economic uncertainty that we are all going through. And um, it's it's interesting to see many photographers, um, especially emerging, a younger generation of photographers kind of coming up and feeling the need to document this moment in time, because we've had um, we always talk about the 83 riots, for example, and the fact that we do have a lot of newspaper records, we have written material, but how much of visual documentation do we have of moments like that? Um, and now with social media and the internet, we have more opportunities to put our work out there, but with that also comes a responsibility. Um, so many responsibilities, I think, about accuracy, about what you choose to document. People are always ready to question so many things, the role we play, uh, the role of a photographer especially, and the role of a writer, the role of so many of us who um, take part in this moment in so many different ways. So in terms of first of all, thank you for joining. So I already
Yeah.
said.
Hi, then thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be part of this conversation.
Yes, and we are had I mean, I'm glad to have you and to have, because it's not easy to schedule these conversations. Also, we are going through power cuts, and we still managed to meet and continue this as we wanted. So, speaking of your role as a photographer, do you see yourself? We'll talk about a few of the images you've taken in a bit. Um, but do you see yourself as an activist or an artist? Because I know you've photographed many things. You've worked in environmental and social issues as well. Um, Before this heavy focus on protesting happened in the country.
Sure. So, okay. I think I try to use my combined knowledge of visual storytelling and conservation to sort of create narratives that drive social change and also highlight, environmental and social issues. And I always sort of like to think of impact when creating work, and I'm interested in, in the way that photography is sort of used, for questioning, for reflection, for interrogation, engaging ideas of social practice, and creating impact through action or awareness. So I think I like to work at the intersection of advocacy, activism, and photography or visual storytelling. So I think the short answer to that maybe is like a little bit of both, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I keep coming back to the moment we are in, but in the larger context of Sri Lanka also, it's very important to be at that intersection. It means that um, you are using your art to further a message, to um, and to spread something that about spread awareness about a cause that matters, and something that matters to you. Um, and you've worked on various projects like this before, but this was your first experience documenting a protest site. How was that experience like?
Yeah, so it was actually the first time that I had taken a camera, to a protest. So it was a very new experience for me. I mean, my work sort of looks at, more, I tend to sort of do more environmental and climate related topics, but also some, social issues. But I hadn't, I've never been a protest photographer. I mean, I'm still not, but I had never taken made images from places of where there were protests happening. So at first, when I sort of went, when I started going for these, I really didn't know what type of images I wanted to make, because there's so much going on, there's so much action, there's so much emotion, there's so much tension. And it was quite overwhelming from like a visual sense. And I was really trying to also figure out at that point what I wanted to communicate with my images. What was I trying to say? And also I was being mindful about the fact, or the need to sort of document for documentation's sake as well, to have images from this really historic period of time, that could serve, so just as a power of witness, so from that was there. But then it was also, what more can I add to this conversation, or what more is needs to be said that maybe isn't being shared, or is not being shared as much as it should be. So a lot of my documentation was actually at like the smaller people's protests, and at Gota Gogama. I didn't actually go for many of like the really big ones where there were like clashes and sort of the tear gas. And this was also an active choice in terms of photographing. I sort of wanted to stay away from making, those types of images that were very loud and showed this, and because also, there were a lot of other photographers that were covering that angle. And so it was also me trying to think of, okay, what can I, how can I add a different perspective in some way? And so after spending more time, in these spaces, I was also sort of getting a bit more interested in documenting what was maybe happening on the fringes of some of these spaces, breaking fast during the Ramadan, people engaging in prayers, people having tea and chatting about the Constitution, some of the more quieter but also really powerful sort of acts of resistance that were happening in these places that were maybe, not center stage at all. And I think also places like Gota Gogama, so exploring sort of what the role of these spaces are in, community building and a sense of solidarity and unity that you see. And it really was incredible to sort of see these resistance movements, evolving and transforming and continuing to persist. And, there was really something very powerful in being witness to that and being part of that energy and that broader movement. And I think also, in a way, I was trying to see if I could shift the narrative, which largely had been portraying, many of the Sri Lankan protests as violent. So I think there was a lot of issues people were raising about how international media was, documenting and covering, reporting the issue, where they would, cherry pick certain images and very stereotypical, violent, or, showing tension and clashes, which, might have been happening, but, there was so much more to it. And I think so I was also trying to sort of see how could I maybe highlight some of these struggles, that are centered around maybe themes of resistance or, love and community, and which is really also ironically like the antithesis of the current regime, in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because shifting the narrative has been difficult in this time, because I mean, we are all the whole country is saying Kota, go home.
Yeah.
But within that, there are so many layers.
Exactly.
There are some who voted for him, some who didn't vote for him, and there are also these layers of society. Then in your image, in your photographs, also you show those layers, and it's so interesting that you focus on some of the layers that are not covered. And international news or any kind international, even locally, right? News outlets didn't cover them in the correct. I don't know if there's a correct way to cover a protest of this scale, but
no, I don't think there is. There's just many ways of doing it, I think,
yeah,
and that's what we need to remember.
yeah, for sure. And your way is that layered way of shifting the narrative is something especially that some of us in the younger generations need to see, and those of us who are using Instagram, Facebook, social media platforms regularly, and are perhaps unaware or don't know much about the country's history or didn't get to see those things firsthand. This is the first time a lot of us are seeing protests of this scale happen, and we've not seen it before. I also feel like the violence is something perhaps we know because of 30 years of war, but peaceful protesting is something we are experiencing now. It's also interesting that it's a protest site, and we immediately protesting conjures images, for me at least, very violent imagery. But this is, your photos really talk about, it removes that violence, and the solidarity comes across very well. I mean, I was at university, I was very much a part of protests that were called violent. I wasn't part of them. I shouldn't say I was part of them. I was in the background and used to hear that they were violent.
Okay, so you did you ever experience sort of tear gassing? And
I've experienced, because I just happened to be in a situation where just tear gas suddenly came out of nowhere, and and that, I think, that's why I think a lot of us have complicated relationships with protests.
Definitely. And I think I just also want to add, I think like my coverage or documentation has been very Colombo centric. So it's not just in Colombo that this is happening, it's happening all over the island. And it's just taken such a variety of forms and formats and ways of rethinking what it means to protest and what it means to resist in the form of all of this sort of oppression. And it's also really amazing. I think maybe there's fewer of photographers documenting outside Colombo, but there are some really, really great local photographers who are covering, what's happening in the north and the east as well, in the south. And I think that's also important, sort of representing all of those sort of realities, and not just going by, what's happening in Colombo on its own, because, it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I wanted to ask you was, so there are different ways in which photographers have been presenting these images they take. And with you, I noticed that you always pair your images with captions that present information to people, and there is a sense of using words to accompany your imagery, while some photographers would caption it in a line or two, and then be like, yes, this is it, my pictures speak for themselves. So with you, how does that awareness building come in through words for you?
So my background is also in communications and advocacy. So with I've had a lot of experience working with development organizations, and that has really pushed me to sort of think about how people engage and respond to sort of complex, cultural, social, or political narratives. And that experience has definitely sort of informed my photographic practice, about how to think of visual storytelling for impact. So I do like to use a lot of words generally, but I think my reasoning for that is I like to give a lot of context. And this sort of comes from a very maybe photojournalistic perspective, where I want to sort of offer the viewer more background, communicate things that which the image on its own may not be able to convey. And this also sort of then allows for more nuanced and then complex perspectives and narratives to be explored. So and there's no one way of doing it. That's sort of what I've found, the way that I like to communicate. And especially for issues around what we're seeing now, it's not straightforward at all. There's so much history, there's so much context, there's so much background that it's kind of difficult. I feel sometimes there is also like a responsibility when I do put out images in how they're going to be viewed, what it's saying, what am I trying to really communicate at this point, and is it could it sort of is it helpful in any way, or could it sort of take away from what's happening because it might misrepresent something or exaggerate something, or there's so many things that could be misinterpreted or miscommunicated. So that's sort of where it comes from for me. And as I said earlier, I think I like to work at the intersection of storytelling and advocacy and activism. So incorporating like elements of each of these wherever possible.
Yeah, thank you. So let's take a look at a few images that I think it would be great if you could speak about.
Sure.
So I think this is one of the first images you posted. And I remember this was all over social media, and this was when things were really heating up in the country. And can you tell us a little bit about how you approached this photograph?
Yeah, so this, as you said, it was quite early. I think this was in, so this was after the Mirihana, that big, protest that happened. Maybe in the week after. This was one of the smaller
early
people's
April.
protests.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I was sure it was March or April.
Yeah.
So it was still early on. Gota Gogama didn't exist at this point. So this was like a smaller people's protest that had that was happening at Diyata Oyana in Battaramulla. And I sort of saw this, and I hadn't planned to actually go for this, but I'd heard that there might be something. So I was like, okay, why don't I just go and check it out? And it was really interesting because there's not a very large group of people, but there were people with trilingual placards and slogans, and there was this one corner where there was this megaphone, and people had printed out sort of the chant, or I don't know what the actual word for it is, but I'm sure you've seen it. It's on the white paper. And so they distributed a few of these, and there were people taking turns, leading the chants. And there was this one guy who, all of them actually were just, there was so much energy. There was, so much passion there, and they were really just lost in that at that point. And so this was sort of, I think it was around 6 p.m. or something. There was on the other side someone, there was a group who had just broken fast. So it was really interesting because, there was all of this happening in this one space. There's traffic, the evening traffic going on one side of the road, people gathering here, this chanting, people breaking fast. It was really, really nice to see just gathering of people, so peaceful, but also very very much there with a message, wanting and demanding something. And I don't think there was much police presence around either. So it was quite nice.
Yeah. This, I like I said before, even the previous image you mentioned, it was important for you to think of this, the fact that it was people gathering, all sorts of communities gathering with the same passion, with the same amount of energy. And in this image, we can definitely see that, because given the complex history our country has had with different ethnic communities. So tell us a little bit about this image also.
So this one was taken at Galle-Face, and this was not exactly at the main Gotago site, but sort of earlier on in Galle-Face. And I was actually heading home. I was walking back to the main to the roundabout, and sort of came across this, and it was really powerful, because on one side, you're having it really gives you so many different ways to think of what a protest can look like. What do resistance movements look like? They can, encompass so many things, and they can have whole space for, so many different communities, and bring together communities as well. So it was quite moving to sort of see this. It was also, I don't know if you can see, it had started raining. It was a light drizzle at that point. And this group of men had were just finishing their evening prayers on the grass. And, some people, and it was just happening there, it's not like people were stopping and watching, things were just, there was just so much going on, there was the traffic, the people who'd come just to fly the kites, and in the midst of all of this, people also taking the time to sort of pray. And it was really, it was something very new. I mean, in my experience of attending protests, I really hadn't seen something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, me neither. And this moment, I think that month of Ramadan was very important for us to think about how invested everybody is in this cause, in this moment in time in the country. So this is from Gotagogama, and
Yes.
it's a phone charging station. Tell us a little bit about this.
This is when, Gotagogama had been well established. I think it had been over a month or maybe even more. So you had the permanent sort of settlements at this place that was initially just, people going, just protesting, and then, growing into a village. And there was just, it was, I mean, I think at the back you see there's like some art there. So there was an entire panel of, if I'm not mistaken, it was around like environmental sort of themes. And there was this people who had just set up a charging hub, and it was so organized, the amount of like sockets that were there, and the way people were keeping tabs on who had brought what in, and they put opening and closing times, which for me was also really interesting. And this is exactly what I was also sort of interested in exploring and wanting to share more of, was these types of moments, the stuff that was happening alongside the protest, supporting it, keeping it going. People just having a quiet moment, in this charging hub, and this could really be anywhere, like you wouldn't think just outside is this, site of agitation, as the state would have liked to call it. But exactly, and this is what, this is also what the protest sort of atmosphere is all about at places like Gotagogama.
Yeah, definitely. So this is another moment at Gotagogama, which I find really fascinating, because there are children who have come with family and watching someone write a slogan. And something so interesting, something that people have been saying is that Gota Gogama is now feels like a beach party or a carnival. And in a carnival, especially, there's that, even at a beach party, there's a spectatorship element. You watch someone do, I don't know, dance or having fun. But here it's about a very political message, and the kids watching this moment might not even remember this. We don't know. But they're witnessing a very specific moment. And like you said, it's that layer of what are these kids experiencing in that moment, being part of that larger political movement in the country. How is it like for you to record moments like this? I think you touched it, but especially moments like this.
Yeah, I mean, here also, I think it's quite interesting because if you just take a moment to, see what's also in the background, right? You have tents, people camping here. You see crowds of people, and you see all of this sort of happening in the backdrop of, the Hilton and the Galadari and sort of the very central places of,
Tourism, luxury, so many
yes,
things. Yeah.
so exactly, right? So you have the Shangri-La on the other side and sort of overlooking all of this, right? And so it's also quite ironic in thinking about, what these sort of places stand for. So, this sort of like elite luxury, place that really doesn't hold space for things like this. And then you have these types of, protests taking place really in the backyard of all of that. And that's what is also really powerful, I think. And this guy was, so he's writing, if you can see, he's writing Gota, go home. And another thing for me that was really important was, also observing the scale of how things sort of grew here. It went from really 1 or 2 tents to this basically like a poster making station, right? So this guy was there with a bunch of bristle boards, and he was writing messages and slogans for anyone who wanted a board. And so this family had come and they had requested for something, and the kids were like super excited to get it. I think you can see like they were just, it was really, really interesting to see that aspect also, like how they were being involved and sort of their role there as well. And it's also this idea of like again coming back to this thing of how this the meaning of protest, or like what it entails and encompasses, is so broad. And it has, you have families, you have really small kids, you have old people, young people, people who are differently able, really wanting to also come and be a part of this and engage in this. And that is, it's just incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's moments like you said before, moments like these are what we will remember. And I mean, as days go by, we think, will this movement succeed? Will all of our passionate cries for help and support, all of that, where will all of this end? Is a question I think we ask ourselves every day. But I think we were speaking about this before, like how important it is for us to keep an archive. And that's layered moments like this, for me, are very powerful. And ultimately, this is what we are going to remember. We are not going to remember, we might remember certain pertinent moments, but images like this really capture the nuances.
And because there's so much happening, and there's so much going on, and it's so important to document, have that documentation. And I guess also, as you mentioned, this time that we are in now, everyone sort of is in a way, documenting through their phone or their camera. And so it's really great to have, so much footage and coverage and reporting, in a sense, also of all of these things, because this is something that we haven't had previously. And I think it will definitely change how we sort of then later in our history also remember these moments, and how we sort of think about them in the broader sort of political and social and cultural landscape of the country.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tashiya, for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes.